Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here for this Friday's show. Up first, how's this weather graphic? We've got blizzard warning out tonight until 3 p.m. tomorrow afternoon here for the Bering Strait coast and St. Lawrence Island. That's for winds gusting to 50 miles an hour, creating whiteout conditions in blowing snow. May pick up another inch additional. And then also with the winds, wind chills will fall to 30, 35 degrees below zero. Up here in the western Arctic coast, blizzard warning out there as well. And looking for winds gusting to 55 miles an hour, reducing wind chills to 65 degrees below zero, and that's out until 9 a.m. Saturday morning. And a wind chill advisory for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, wind chills to 55 degrees below zero, and that's out until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Otherwise, moving on to satellite imagery, you can see storm system down here pulling northward toward Vancouver Island once again, and the front extending up, just clipping the southern southeast coast here, wrapping back in around the bent back occlusion of that system. Some clearing, though, along the central coast of the Panhandle, and band of clouds bringing the light snow, kind of persistent light snow right through here, moving through, so tapering off, especially to the south and west of the Cook Anchorage area here in the western Kenai Peninsula, and then another band here, a very weak band, bringing some areas of light snow and snow showers, flurries, Alaska Peninsula on up across the southwest interior, Dillingham, Togiak into the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta areas, and kind of stalling out over the northern Bering Sea. And a band of moisture here with a little bit of light snow. Again, Fairbanks area over towards North Pole and back to the west. And then again, very cold temperatures up over the north slope. Umiat Airfield this morning at a low temperature of 54 degrees below zero, and still in the lower to minus 40s to upper minus 30s in some areas over the north slope. Pick the winds up here, and again this afternoon, 31 degrees below zero at 3 o'clock at Point Lay, with northeast winds gusting to 40 miles an hour. That dropped their wind chills down to 70 degrees below zero. And then out to the west, again, a weak system out here, kind of a weak frontal boundary there, weak low west of Adak, another one just off the picture there, and that pushing that front eastward and westerly flow, the stronger jet to the south, and that bringing some moisture into the eastern Aleutians, some shower conditions in toward Adak and Atka on out toward Shimei and Attu. On the chart today, weak low pressure just south of Prince William Sound, that in the trough extending northward there, that band kind of moving eastward. It is moving eastward here and ending from west-southwest to east-northeast. Brought about another inch or so in some locations, saw a little more, others less, and then to the west here, not much of anything. Same thing up over the interior, northern eastern interior, pretty dry today, and then the cold conditions within, add the wind to that over the western Arctic coast. And this trough extending in from that low center over the Bering Sea brought some areas of light snow into the southwest interior. And this weakening front spreading some moisture, rain, and snow. A little bit of an increase in the winds for the Fox Islands today, and then a lot of snow shower and rain and snow showers back over the western and central Aleutians. Weak trough here brought some rain, but not a whole lot, less than what they had yesterday in the 24-hour period ending today. About a third of an inch falling around Ketchikan, lighter amounts, more scattered showers to the north there. Next system kind of moving up too, and we'll see low pressure comes onto the chart here, and a warm front begins to increase the rain once again later tonight in the Panhandle there, and then cuts off dry over the northern Panhandle. Some clearing up around Lynn Canal area to Skagway. And snow kind of lingers, light snow flurries or snow showers for Matanuska Valley into northern Cook Inlet, mainly this evening, and then some of that over the Copper River Basin. Just really just a slight chance of some snow flurries over the Kobuk Valley here. Pretty dry over the interior, and then the snow and blowing snow blizzard conditions both for the western Arctic coast and St. Lawrence Island area, with this trough bringing some continuous light snow into the Yukon Delta, with scattered snow showers over the Kuskokwim Delta to about Togiak Bay. This weak front continues to weaken, but will hold together enough to bring some moisture into the Alaska Peninsula in the form of rain or snow. And a couple of weak lows back to the west keep rain and snow showers or snow showers over the Aleutians. And not much change for tomorrow out that way. Low pressure drifts eastward to just west of Adak. So again, southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians looking showery, kind of unsettled with this system, this front pushing into Bristol Bay. That could kick the winds up to gusts 35 to 40 miles an hour around Togiak. Not so much Togiak, King Salmon, probably see maybe 25, 30 miles an hour over at Togiak. And then weak trough there, bringing the blizzard conditions continue until about 3 p.m. in the afternoon for St. Lawrence Island and Bering Strait coast. Could pick up an additional inch, and that's about it. Dry over the interior, all the way up to the Arctic coast there, with continued cold conditions up in that area. And a weak trough here keeps a chance of snow showers, mainly over the Copper River Basin. Some of that may get as far west as Talkeetna, but that's going to be pretty light. Scattered rain and snow showers for the North Gulf Coast, and rain over the southern Panhandle, dry to the north. And moving ahead to Sunday, much stronger system comes up toward Kodiak Island. Tight pressure field ahead of this front brings storm warnings into the Kamishak Bay area, Barren Islands, North Gulf Coast, over to the eastern North Gulf Coast, all under the influence of a storm warning for Sunday in the marine areas. 40-knot winds expected for Prince William Sound out of the east, and gales developing along the coast with rain on the increase by late afternoon, becoming moderate to possibly heavy at times. Clear and cold up over the northern interior, especially from the Brooks Range on out to the Arctic coast, but variably cloudy down into the northwestern valleys as well. And still a lot of snow showers out over the Bering Sea here, kind of another push of cold air coming down. So that'll extend the snow showers into the eastern Aleutians, tapering off out to the west. Lows tonight, single numbers and teens, interior Alaska, otherwise 20s elsewhere for the Panhandle, mid-20s to upper 30s. Highs tomorrow in the 30s to lower 40s for the southeast coast. Teens for the Copper River Basin, 20s to lower 30s south central Alaska, and the teens west of the Alaska Range, and upper 20s near 30 for Bristol Bay. Lows down a little below freezing for Kodiak, otherwise teens in the Susitna Valley, 20 south central Alaska, 5 below to 5 above for the Copper River Basin, Kuskokwim Valley, lows 20s to upper 30s for the Panhandle, and highs lower 40s southern southeast coast, right around freezing up toward Haines and Skagway, 20s to lower 30s south central Alaska, and near 40 for Kodiak. Lows tonight, below zero just about everywhere north of the Alaska Range, and then highs 0 to 10 in the central interior, well below zero for the north slope to the Arctic coast, followed by lows again below zero just about everywhere, coldest on the north slope, followed by highs 5 below to 5 above now in the central interior, a shade above zero for St. Lawrence Island. And for the southwest coast, lows tonight right around 20 there. And for the Pribilofs, upper 20s or so, lower 30s for the Aleutians, mid-30s for the eastern Aleutians. And then for the highs, Saturday afternoon staying in the 20s on the coast, 30s elsewhere, and the lows in the teens along the coast, 20s to lower 30s for the remainder of the area.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Saturday morning shows a lot of IFR here in northern Bering Sea into the western interior. Some more IFR, northern Cook Inlet up across portions of the Matanuska Susitna Valley, mainly along the Talkeetnas there, then back into the Copper River Basin. And a little bit of IFR here for the Alaska Peninsula, marginal Kodiak Island, VFR, Brooks Range to the Arctic coast, and marginal VFR, some areas of VFR for the Aleutians. Gulf of Alaska, marginal into the Panhandle, marginal VFR. And for the afternoon, big improvement here over the central interior, becoming VFR, Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, all the way up into the northwestern Copper River Basin to the Fairbanks area, and out to the west in the northern Kuskokwim Valley. actually almost to the southwest coast there. Brooks Range of the Arctic coast stays VFR. Some IFR lingering here over the southeastern Copper River Basin to Yakutat, as well as the southern Panhandle. And marginal VFR again with some areas of IFR, or I'm sorry, marginal VFR, there is a VFR for the Aleutians, and IFR holding over the northern Bering Sea. And for Sunday morning, that area pretty much stays put here, drifts a little farther to the south, but basically from St. Lawrence Island to a ways north of St. Paul Island. We've got IFR right into the southwest coast, Togiak Bay, and then up into the southwest interior to a certain extent there, Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, narrow band along the Alaska Range, Kodiak mostly IFR, no change over the Aleutian, southern Bering Sea, good VFR in the central interior, now some marginal VFR showing up for the North Slope and the Arctic coast, and Prince William Sound, VFR, areas of IFR for the Panhandle for the afternoon Sunday, northern half of the southeast coast, IFR, southern half marginal. IFR for the North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound to probably as far west as, say, Portage and into the Coast Range. And then VFR for the Alaska Range into the interior, marginal VFR North Slope Arctic coast, band of IFR here from Kamishak Bay, Iliamna Lake area, western Alaska Range crossed to the west there into the southwest coast, northern Bering Sea, still mostly IFR, marginal to the south, and then areas of VFR again for the Aleutians and south side of the Alaska Peninsula. Passes, Anatuvik, and Adigan. Another VFR day coming up tomorrow for Saturday. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR at times. Rainy though, VFR. Windy, same forecast. Good VFR for Windy Pass and Isabel VFR. Mentasta starting out marginal VFR, and then mostly VFR for the remainder of the day. Tanita VFR. Portage, marginal VFR. And Chilcoot White VFR. And for the freezing level here, nudging just north of the Pribilof Islands and then along the Alaska Peninsula Aleutian Range, kind of cutting through Shelikof Strait there, and then up along the North Gulf Coast, onto the southeast, 2,000 feet over the southern Panhandle there with that milder southerly flow that's pulling the moisture northward. And for icing, a little bit of isolated moderate possible here in northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island, maybe into the Wales, Teller, Nome area. Another batch down here over Bristol Bay, southeast Bering Sea, and maybe some light icing here for the North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound, but the heavier icing with that southerly flow, warm front conditions brings considerable moderate rime icing into the southern southeast coast. And the jet stream there, 70-knot winds pulling that moisture northward. Otherwise, the main jet south of the forecast area, light winds over much of interior Alaska at this elevation, about 33,000 feet, as well as the Aleutians and the Bering Sea. And down to 9,000 feet, weak upper level trough here right over south central Alaska. Really light winds at this elevation as well, 40 knots from the west-southwest there along the Alaska Peninsula, and then the stronger winds south of the Aleutians. Then we've got some stronger winds cutting up here up to 50, 55 knots, just clipping Hyder-Stewart area of the Panhandle and 3,000 feet. 65-knot winds into Dexton Entrance there, and then they abruptly cut off and go northwest along the coast, kind of a sharp trough axis there. 40 knots there for the southwest coast and the eastern Aleutians and western Bering Sea. Moderate chop, moderate turbulence for the western Arctic coast, St. Lawrence Island, as well as Bristol Bay, King Salmon area, especially up against the terrain there. Otherwise, pretty smooth. Interior Alaska, moderate turbulence, southeast coast.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission, GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limit-Disk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. GOLD connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is GOLD. The GOLD instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. GOLD collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. GOLD joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We project that by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans, and as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Marine forecasts here for the southeast coast on, let's back it up to Saturday first. East winds 20-25 knots on the south coast. North coast, pretty light. Southerlies at about 10 knots. Northwest 10 for Lynn Canal. North 10 for Stevens Passage. Clarence Strait, southeast 15 knots. Now for Sunday, gale warnings developing here on the south coast. From the south, 30 to 35 knots, and central coast south 35 knots. Storm warnings on the north coast here, south to southeast winds increasing to 50 knots as that next strong frontal system moves east and northeastward. Lynn Canal, southeast at 10, southeast 20 for Stevens Passage. Small craft advisories developing for Clarence Strait out of the southeast. And for Prince William Sound, Saturday, light variable winds with slight seas. Variable winds 10 to 15 knots for the North Gulf Coast, south at 15 there for the Barren Islands, east winds 25 knots, Kamishak Bay, and for Cook Inlet, northeast winds 10 to 25 knots, strongest south of the Forelands. And then for Sunday, big increase in the winds here, northern Cook Inlet, north at 30 knots, and full gales here, southern Cook Inlet, northeast 45 knots, storm warnings, Kamishak Bay, northeast winds 50 knots, storm warnings for the Barren Islands, southeast 50 knots, 21-foot seas. For the North Gulf Coast, storm warnings, east-southeast winds 50 knots, seas 18 to 23 feet, and Prince William Sound, gale warnings, east winds increasing to 40 knots, seas building to 10 feet. Kodiak Island, south to southeast winds tomorrow at 15 to 20 knots. The Alaska Peninsula, south to southwest winds at 25 knots. And for Bristol Bay, east winds at 20 knots. And here's what we got in store for Sunday. Gales for Kodiak Island, axis right on the island there, northeast 40 knots there for Shelikof Strait, southwest 40 on the east side of the island. Alaska Peninsula, small craft advisories, west winds 25 to 30 knots, northwest at 30 for Bristol Bay. For the eastern Aleutians, west-southwest winds 25 to 30 knots for Saturday, southwest 20 for Adak and Atka. And the Aleutians out here, western Aleutians, north 25. And for Sunday, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots here for the western Aleutians, Adak and Atka, west 30 to 35 knots. And for the Fox Islands, west winds 25 to 30 knots. For the southwest coast, on Saturday, we've got east winds 20 to 25 knots, northwest at 20 there for the Pribilof Islands, back to east St. Matthew Island at 20 knots, brisk wind advisories again for St. Lawrence Island, northeast at 30 knots. North 30 knots for Sunday for St. Lawrence Island, north 20 knots on the Yukon Delta coast, west 20, Kuskokwim Delta coast, northwest at 20 there for the Pribilof Islands, and north winds 30 knots for St. Matthew Island. And moving up to the Arctic coastal areas, for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, northeast 15 knots for the day on Saturday, northeast at 20 knots on the western coast. Brisk wind advisories continue here for the western Arctic coast for east-northeast winds sustained at 30 knots, and then from Cape Thompson to Wales, north at 20 knots. And for Sunday, not much change, north 20 knots here, Wales to Cape Thompson. Western Arctic coast, brisk wind advisories continue for northeast winds at 30 knots. Northeast 15 for the central coast, and becoming quite light on the east side there, down to 10 knots from the east and northeast. And for tonight again, blizzard warning out tonight and wind chill warning for the western Arctic coast till I think it's 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Definitely for the night tonight, dry up in this area. Few lingering flurries here over the eastern interior, on down to the Copper River Basin, northern Cook Inlet area, and some scattered shower conditions for the North Gulf Coast. Rain increasing over the southern panhandle, dry in the north. Not much change out over the Bering Sea. A couple of weak lows keep it unsettled out there with snow showers, and this front will actually kick the winds up Bristol Bay tomorrow with increasing moisture, rain or snow there. Gusty winds and drier for king salmon with that downsloping wind flow. Dry and cold over the western and northern interior areas, and then on Sunday, big storm moves up to just almost on top of Kodiak Island or a little to the east. That'll bring storm force winds with gusts of 65 miles an hour into the North Gulf Coast here, and gales developing on the panhandle of the coastal areas with rain heavy at times moving in, especially on the central and south coast late in the day. Otherwise, looks a little breezier. Places like Delta Junction in the interior with more of a gradient, stays windy on the western Arctic coast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.